Authentication is one of the key cornerstones of any application. If you're building anything complex, you probably want to authorize your users and let them log in. And today we're going to be doing just that. We're going to learn how to authenticate our users using React Router. I'm going to use all the latest tools like middleware and sessions and stuff like that. So we're going to have a lot of fun. For the database, I'm going to use Prisma, and I'm going to also use ShadCN for the client. We're going to be using a combination of React hook form and Remix hook form for form validation and auth for schema validation. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So I've already prepared this nice looking dashboard for us, and it's not really functional, but it's just eye candy. And we don't want this dashboard to be visible to anybody, but we want our users to first authenticate themselves and allow them to log in before they can see the dashboard. And currently, as you can see, I can access it without being logged in. And another thing we want to do is when the user logs in, we don't want to show this random email and random username. So what we are gonna do is we're gonna show the user's actual email here. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to create a login page, a register page, and allow users to log in or register. So now that we know what we need to do, let's do it. So the first thing I want to cover is the login page. So if I go here, you can see that we have the login page prepared. And if I click register, we also have the register page. So obviously we're going to do both. So when you click register, you get these invalid email and you get these errors. All right, so I've prepared all the UI for us because that is not the purpose of this exercise, but what is to implement it on the backend. So before we actually start coding, I want to show you what I've prepared. So the first thing is I've set up Prisma. So I have added these DB scripts to the bottom of my package.json. So for generating the Prisma client, for the studio, for migrations, pushing, blah, blah, blah. I also set up Docker to start up a Postgres database locally. So the db up command starts it, db down shuts it off. That's all for the package.json. Then for our client, we have a few things. So the first thing we want to look at is the routes. So I've prepared the auth layout. So you can see that this has the layout. And I've added this custom hook to get the current page and then render either the left side or the right side depending on where you're on, and that's the navigation animation you saw earlier, so that's what allows this to happen. And this is just the basic layout. You have the outlet that renders the actual form, and then you have everything else that we're gonna gloss over because it doesn't matter, because it's just UI. And then you have your auth login page. I've already prepared some code here that we're gonna go into detail a bit later on. What you need to know is everything's set up, so I'll explain it as we go. The auth register as well. And then we have our dashboard here. And as you can see, the dashboard for now just returns the loader data, and that's pretty much it. So it's not doing any checks to know if the user can do that or not, and we're just flying blind here. All right, and the last thing, we have our DB. So the DB is just imported from Prisma generated /client. If you don't know where the syntax comes from, I've defined this in our TS config. So in our TS config, I've defined 3 paths. So domain is app/domain, Prisma generated is app generated Prisma. And then you have this last one, which is pretty familiar for anybody who uses Remix or React Router. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into the DB here. So what I do is I just define the Prisma client. So a fun fact here, before what we had to do in Remix is we would have to create a singleton for this, because when you do hot module reloads, it would start up multiple instances and connect to the database, which would crash your development server. This is actually not needed with Vite, because Vite handles this properly, so you don't have to do that. You can just define it like this, export it, and you're done. The only case where this might not be the case is if you're running it on the edge. So there, it might be a good idea to create a singleton, but besides that, you're good to go. All right, and that is the walkthrough of what we have. I'm gonna link the repo below so you can check it out for yourself and follow along. And the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to auth.server.ts in our domain/auth. So I've organized this to make some sense. You don't have to do it like this. You can do it differently. It's really up to you. The important thing is the code. The organization is really opinionated and you can do whatever you want. So the first thing we want to do is when we want to authenticate users, we want to create a session for them. So let's create a session. So we're gonna import from React Router createCookieSessionStorage. And if you've ever used React Router, this is probably very familiar to you. And this is actually the session that we want. So we're gonna just name it auth session instead of what we had by Copilot. Now that we have the auth session, I'm gonna import something else. And that's gonna come from Remix Utils. And that's gonna be and/middleware and/session. So what we want to import from here is unstable create session middleware as session middleware. We don't like the word unstable around here. And what we are gonna do is we are going to create a session middleware. And what we are gonna do is we're gonna call session middleware. And this takes the session storage as the first argument. So auth session storage. And then the second argument is the should commit function. And this allows you to define when a session should commit or not. We are gonna leave it undefined because whenever we have changes in the session, we want to commit it by default. So that's what we want to do. So we're not gonna change that. And this returns a tuple. And the first tuple argument is the auth session middleware. And the second one is get auth session. All right, so the auth session middleware, this we will pass into the middleware function to run it on every request. And the get auth session, we are gonna use somewhere else. So now that we have this in place, we're going to export both of these. And we're not gonna export the auth session storage. And if you don't know about this, you can go to the Remix documentation and read it here. So createCookieSessionStorage, you can search it via this button and then read all of this, what you can define, how it works and stuff like that. I'm not gonna go into this. I assume you know what this is. If you don't, just go here and read it and then come back to our coding. So now that we exported these two, let's use them. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to root tsx in the app. And at the bottom here, we're gonna say export const unstable middleware. And we're gonna say that the type of this is route unstable middleware function array. And we're gonna define the auth session middleware here. All right. And now let's talk about what this does. So when you have your session and you put it in this middleware, what this middleware is going to do is whenever you call session.set, it's going to automatically set it whenever you return a response or throw it or whatever. So whenever in the app you do something like, so if I go to the auth server again, and for example, let's say const session is equal to get auth session. And we're gonna ignore the error for now. I just wanna show you this. So if you do session.set, for example, user is null, wherever you call this in your loader or action, this is going to auto commit itself. What you had to do before is you would have to commit this session via auth session storage. And then you would do something like commit session, and then you would set this as a header on the return response. Well, now you don't have to do that. So all you have to do is call session.set and you're done. This is going to be committed by itself and we're good to go. So that's the first piece of this authentication. And now we have self-committing sessions that we can use anywhere. So what's next? Well, in order for somebody to have a session, we first have to let them create a user profile. So what we are gonna do is we are gonna go to the schema.prisma and check out the models I've prepared. So the user model has the email and the name, and the password is linked to the user, so we keep the passwords in a separate table. And this might not be the best schema out there, but it's sufficient for our use case. I just want to show you how all of this works. It's really up to you how you define your schemas. You probably want to do some other stuff and add some other fields, so you define that yourself and come back to us. And with that out of the way, let's start implementing this. So the first place we're gonna go is the register place, or the register route. And in the register route, let's go over the code we have. So the first thing that I have defined is the ZOD schema. So this is a ZOD 4, you can use 3 or whatever, it doesn't matter. You can use whatever schema you want. You just define your schema, and what I've done is I've said I want an object with email, password, and confirm password. And then I refine it by checking if the password and the confirm password match. So that's pretty cookie cutter register schema. And one thing that we might want to do is, instead of defining it in the file itself, we might want to define a custom file to export it from. And why we want to do that, you'll see later, but for now, just bear with me. In our domain for authentication, we're gonna create a new file called register.schema.ts, and we're gonna go back to our register. We're gonna say export const schema, and we're gonna take this out of here. We're gonna move it into our separate file, and we're gonna import ZOD. And we're gonna do ZOD v4. All right, we save this, and now we just import it here. Awesome. So what have we done? We have moved it into our domain function, and now we import it in the route. And in the route, we define a resolver, which is used on both the client and the server to validate the data. So now let's look at the action. So the action here has this getValidatedFormData, which takes in the request and the resolver. And what this does is it checks if there are any form validation errors. So for example, if the server received a string instead of a number and stuff like that. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna give you the errors back, and you send these errors back to the client. And this is a function from Remix Hook Form. And Remix Hook Form, when it does this, it returns the errors like this, and then automatically gives them to the use remix form. And this use remix form stores them in the form state, so you can just do form state.errors.email.message in your client, and this is going to show both the client and the server errors at the same time. So you don't have to define anything yourself, you don't have to set them yourself, you don't have to retrieve them from the action, you don't have to do anything. Now that with that out of the way, we also have the handle submit that submits the form, and we also use the native form element from React Router, so this is progressively enhanced. So if JavaScript doesn't work here, it's still gonna submit to the same route and it's still gonna work. And then we plop in the register function, which registers the fields, so whenever there are changes, it saves them in state. And yeah, that's pretty much it and what we do. So we have the input fields, so the input and the input error. We register the email, we register the password, and we register the confirm password. So what does that look like in action? Well, like this. So you have your login, you have your input, the input error, and also the input and the input error. So if I refresh the page, you can see that we have no errors, and when I click login, you get the errors. So that's what this looks like in action. And also for register, if I click register, you get the errors and you have your input. So that's how this works. And when you submit to the server, it's also going to validate there, return the errors, and show them here if there are any. All right, so that's the first piece of the puzzle. So let's go back. So now what we want to do is we want to handle the data once we are done with error handling. So we get the data, and this function also returns the data. And if you return the errors like this, by the time you're past this, you're going to have type safe data. And what we are gonna do is we're gonna call register user. And this is a function I already prepared, and we are gonna write it together. So let's look at the data that we got. So we got the email, the password, and the confirm password. So check this out. If I go to the register user, we want to take in the same data type. And this is why I moved the schema out of this route. So now here, what I can do is I can say user data, and I can use the schema that I've got by doing .infer. And how we're gonna do that is we're gonna go to the register schema. Here, we're gonna say export type is register form schema, or actually we're gonna say new user data is equal to .infer, and we're gonna use this here. So we're gonna import it from the register schema, and now we get the user data from the action, and we're gonna pass it into here in the action, and we're gonna await this. All right, so now we have the user data that signed up. So you might be thinking, all right, so what do we do now? Well, first of all, we need to check if the email exists. So we're gonna do that right now, and we're gonna do existing user is await getUser by email. And we're gonna implement this function right now. So function getUser by email is string, and then we're gonna do the following. So const user is equal to await db, and we're gonna import our database. We're gonna say user and find unique where email, and we're gonna make this an async function, and we're gonna return the user. So this is either going to be a user or null. All right, and we're gonna actually just select the ID, the email, and the name, for example. So we are gonna get this user, and here we already have the existing user. Now that we check if the user exists, so if he exists, we are going to return errors, email, message, email already exists, and type is custom. So this will get handed to remix hook form, and it was gonna show the error. And we're gonna save this. And now we have handled the case where the user exists. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, let's continue. So if the user exists, we stop right there. But if it doesn't, we want to create a new user. And how we're gonna do that is exactly as Copilot says. So new user is dbuser create, and the data is email. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna say data, and we're just gonna close this for now. And inside of here, we're gonna say email is user data dot email. And because the password is on another table, we're gonna say password create hash is, so we are going to use hash from crypto, and we're gonna import it from node crypto. So how hash works is you define the algorithm. So we're gonna do SHA-256, and we're gonna give it the user data dot password. All right, and that's all it takes to create a new user. So now that we have the new user, do you know what's next? Well, think about it. So we created the new user, but we haven't done anything with it. And we need the user to persist across multiple requests. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna get the auth session inside of here. But this requires the context. So now we have a problem. So this is passed into every loader and action, but we want to get it here. So there are three ways to solve this. The first one is you pass it as a parameter into the function. The second one is you get it in the loader or action, and then you pass it in as a parameter into this function. So almost the same with minimal differences. But there is a third way to do it with middleware. And this is really cool that I'm gonna show you. And I'm gonna teach you how to create globally accessible variables. And how we're gonna do that is we're gonna create a new file. So in the domain, I'm gonna create a new folder called utils. And inside of here, I'm gonna create global context.ts. All right, so have you ever heard about AsyncLocalStorage? Well, AsyncLocalStorage is imported from Node async hooks. And if you haven't heard about it, you can think of it as basically React context, but on the server. So when you wrap something with this, it allows you to access something that is stored inside of the context in the execution scope. So for example, if you wrap 3 functions with it, all 3 functions have access to it without you having to pass anything as an argument. And the way it works is we do the following. We define global storage like this, new async local storage. And then how you get it is const get global storage is equal to const storage is equal to global storage dot get store. So if not storage, so if you're using this function somewhere you shouldn't be, you're gonna throw a new error, storage unavailable. Otherwise, you're gonna return the storage. All right, so this is really cool, but what does this have to do with React Router? Well, check this out. So we're gonna create a middleware for React Router, and it's going to be called global storage middleware. And we're gonna do the following. So we're gonna define this as unstable middleware function. And now that we have done that, we're gonna grab the context and we're gonna grab next. So what we want to do is we're gonna return a new promise and the resolve. And now that we return a promise, we want to fetch the auth session from the context. So we pass in the context here. And now we have the auth session. And because this is running in middleware, this is all valid code. And now we're gonna do global storage is going to run. And we're gonna say auth is auth session. And then the callback is resolve. So resolve the promise with next. And we save this. So what does this do? So the get auth session gets the session from the React Router context. And then we return a new promise and we run global storage.run and we pass this as the context. So if you think in terms of React, this would be your value to your context provider. And then this function would be your children. So whatever is inside of here is the children that get the context. So resolve next basically tells React Router, I'm giving you this callback and everything inside of it is going to have access to this. And we're gonna use this middleware in our root. So we're gonna export it and go to the root. And then after the auth session middleware, we're gonna say global storage middleware. And this is complaining, but I think if we remove this and import this directly from React Router, yeah, so now this complains. And how we're gonna fix this is we're gonna say any here, and this is gonna work. I'm not sure why the types don't work properly, but for now we don't really care. And we're gonna save this. So let's get back to user.server. So now here we need to get the auth session. Well, if you remember, here we can get the global storage, and what we are gonna do here is we're gonna export const get auth session, and it's going to be pretty simple. So get global storage. Oh, but the names collide. So we're gonna say get auth session as get auth session from context. And we're gonna use it here. And now we can export this. And now we just do this. Const storage is equal to get global storage. And we return storage.auth. But this is not typed. So what we need to do here is here define the type actually. So we're gonna say type is global storage, and we're gonna say auth is session storage, and we're gonna say global storage. Actually, no, it's not session storage, but session. All right, so, and maybe because this is the actual auth session, we might rename it like this, and then instead of doing storage.auth, we do storage.auth session, and here we just pass it in like. And now, if I do get auth session, and actually I don't want to import it from the auth server, but I want to import it from global context. So now we can do this, and now we have the session, and we can do this. So session.set user, and the value is gonna be ID, so new user.id, and also the email, which is new user.email. So here you can store whatever you want. It's really up to you. And we're gonna rename this to actually be auth session, and we're gonna save it. So now we are storing the user in the session. So if we recap, we check if the user exists. If he doesn't, we create the new user, and then we store him in the session. And this session gets auto-committed, and this getter gets created before we even run this. So by the time we set this session, we are done with everything. So we return null, and we save this. So because we return errors here, I really like to be consistent. So here I'm not gonna return null, I'm gonna return errors that are null. And we're gonna save this. So now if I go back to the register route, I am going to do this. I'm gonna get the errors, and I'm gonna call them registration errors because the name collides with this one. And if errors return errors, if registration errors, return errors as registration errors. And finally, if there are no errors, so the user is registered, we just redirect. And we're gonna use the href function. So this is a typesafe utility that lets you get all the routes in the project. And because we want to redirect to the dashboard, we're gonna do just that. So let's actually try to register now. All right, so now we want to register. So I'm gonna do test@test.com. We're gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I know the password sucks, sue me. And we're gonna click register. And as you can see, we are on the dashboard. We have our dashboard shown, but if you don't remember, we said this is not protected, and that's still the case. So let's go back to the code and let's protect this route, so if you're not logged in, you can't access it. All right, so we're back here, but this is not the place we want to do it. Where we want to do it is probably the auth server. And I think I'm gonna rename this. So we're gonna call it get auth session from context. So we know the difference between this one and the one we used before. So we're gonna change it in here to this, and that's all we have to do for now. So if I go back here, I can do the following. So we want to define another thing, and that's export const require user. And again, this will be the unstable middleware function. And we're gonna do the following. So const auth session is equal to, now here we have multiple options because this is a middleware. We can just get it from the context. We don't have to use the global one. So we can just do get session from context, and we can do this. And then if auth session get user, or rather we're just gonna plop this into here, session. If not session, then we are gonna throw a redirect, and we're gonna use href again. So we're gonna redirect to login. Otherwise, we're gonna return next. And we need to get it from here. And that's pretty much it. So this will protect our dashboard. So if I go to the dashboard route, all we have to do is say export constant stable middleware, and we say this, and we import it, and we save it, and your dashboard is protected now. And now if I refresh this, I'm still here. And if I go to my application memory and I delete all the cookies and then I refresh this, we are on the login page. All right, now we have protected the dashboard. So now we are kind of stuck because we haven't implemented the login page and we need to log in to continue working on the example. So now we have to implement the login page. So let's go to the login page. And again, we're gonna do the same thing. So we're gonna export the schema, and we're not gonna keep it in this file. We're gonna move it to its own file. And generally, you should, whenever you want to export stuff and reuse it, not keep it in the file of the route, but export it from somewhere else, because it would break hot module reloads for you. You would get the error hot module reload invalidate is wrong. So best practice is not to keep it in the route files anyways. But because we need to use it in our domain functions, we need to move it there as well. So we're gonna here create a login.schema.ts. And then in the login here, we're gonna plop this out. We're gonna move it to the login schema. We're gonna import Zod from Zod version 4. And we're also going to export the type because we already know we're gonna need it later. So user login is equal to Zod.infer type of login form schema. And all right, so now we go to the login page, we import it here, and then we go here, and the action is the same as before. The login route is the same as before. So whatever we saw on the register page, it's the same here. We also have the input fields. You get the errors, you get the idea. All right, so with that out of the way, let's talk about your implementation. So again, we get the data from the getValidatedFormData, and then we just do this. So await login user. And same stuff as before. We haven't implemented it yet. Let's do it together. So as we know, we pass in the data. We go here, and then we say new user login data. And we're gonna say user login. And that, just to be consistent, I'm gonna rename this to be user login data. All right, so what do we want to do? So we want to check if the password is correct, and we also want to log the user in. So what does that mean? We want to add him into the session. So let's first check if the password is correct and the email is correct. So first we check the email. Await get user by email. Login data dot email. So if the user exists, we're moving on. So if the user doesn't exist, we return errors email. This email does not exist, or rather email message. All right, so if the user doesn't exist, we return the email message. But if he does exist, now we want to check for the password. So because we are hashing the password, all we have to do is the following. Await db user find unique where email is login data.email, password hash is, so again, hash from crypto, the same algorithm, and whatever we got from the login data. So password. All right, now we know if the password is correct or not. Or actually, this is not password correct, but logged in user. All right, so we have the logged in user. So now we, at this point, if he is not found, this means the password is incorrect. So again, we return the errors. You can either do password or email. Here you can just say this user is not found, for example, or this password is incorrect. This depends on how much safety you want in your app. You can even make it something really generic, so it's really up to you. And also here we need to do message. And yeah, so now that the user is found and he's logged in, well, he's not logged in, he's just found in the database. So now we want to log him in. Well, let's do that. We do the following. We get the auth session with get auth session. And remember, this is globally available. And then we just do auth session set user, again, email is logged in user.email and ID is logged in user.id. And that's pretty much it, right? Well, no. Here we need to return the errors, and this is gonna be null, and we're gonna save this. And now we're gonna go back to the login page, and here we're just gonna plop out the errors. And again, login errors, and then if login errors, return errors as login errors. Finally, we just redirect to the dashboard and we save it. All right, so let's see what we did. They say that coding blind is the best way to do it, so let's see if we do this and we do a random password. This email does not exist. So if I do this but the password is wrong, the password is incorrect. And now if I get the password right, we are on the dashboard. Perfect. We have that out of the way. And there's one more thing we haven't done, and that is show the information here. So how are we gonna do that? Pretty simple. So let's go back to the code, and we're gonna go to our root TSX, and inside of the root TSX we're gonna do the following. In the loader, we're going to get auth session is equal to get auth session. Const user is equal to auth session get user. And now, so this can either be defined or not. This wouldn't be the user, but the user session data. And what we want to do now is actually get the user from the user session data. So for example, how we might want to do that is if user session data dot email const user is equal to await user by email, which is I think not exported from the user domain. Yeah, it's not exported, so if I export it and then I use it in the here, user session data.email, we're gonna get the user. But this looks kind of bad. So is there any better way to do it? And we would still have to do it in every loader, so it kind of sucks. Well, there is, well, the first thing obviously you can do is extract it into a utility function. But if you haven't forgotten, we have the global context. And then here, what else we can do is we can say user. And this is either gonna be defined or not. And we're gonna import the user from Prisma. And we're gonna say the following. So pick email and ID. So this will be our type that we store. And then if I go back here, so how do we get the user? Well, easy, we get it here. So const user is equal to, so auth session get user. Well, actually first we're gonna do the get. So const user data is equal to this, and then user data dot email await get user by email. So user data dot email, otherwise undefined. And we made it async, and now we have the user, and now we can use the user here as well. And the type is complaining, I'm guessing. So here we don't want the name. We're gonna save it. And we're also gonna say or null here. Actually, we're gonna make the user required, but he's gonna be either null or defined. And that's pretty much it. So now we save this, and now we create another utility. So instead of get auth session, get user, and because he's maybe not defined, get maybe user, or get optional user. That's the best name you can do, and user. And then you can also create another utility called export const get user is equal to const user is equal to get optional user, if not user, throw new error user should be available here. And then you return the user. All right. So now in our root TSX, if I go here, we can say const user is equal to get optional user, and I just return him. And then in the dashboard, because we know that user is there, we're gonna say const user is get user, and we return him. So if I hover over this, it's ID email. And let's save it and see what happens. All right, so we're on the dashboard. Let's open the React Router DevTools and let's look at what we have. So the user is plopped into the root TSX and is also plopped into here, so in the dashboard. So what does this mean for us? Well, now we can replace this email finally. And that's the last piece of the puzzle. So let's do that and call it a day. So the last thing we want to do is show the user. So how are we gonna do that? Well, pretty easily. We're gonna go into app sidebar. We're gonna go into nav user. So here we want to have the user, but we want to have it in a type safe manner. So what we can do is we can create a hook. So it's up to you where you create the hook. I am going to do it in the hooks folder. Some people don't like that, so it's really up to you. So I'm gonna call the hook use dashboard data.ts, and we're gonna export a function use dashboard data. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna do this. So const match is equal to use route loader data, and the route ID is route/dashboard. And the type of this is route, and we're gonna import the dashboard route component props loader data. All right. And now if not match, throw new error. This does not exist on the current route. Dashboard data, actually, now that just to make it more specific. And then we return the match. All right, so we have this hook here. We go to the nav user and we do the following. So use dashboard data, and then we have the user. And then we go down here. We say user email. We're gonna delete the name. We're gonna delete the avatar, and we're actually gonna delete this as well because we are not getting it as a prop anymore. And we're also going to delete it here. And I think that's pretty much it. We're gonna delete all the unnecessary stuff. And we're gonna go to the app sidebar and delete it here as well. So we're gonna save this. We have our actual email here. And now wherever I need the user, I can access it on the dashboard using that hook. And I also can access it outside of the dashboard. So for example, if I log out. And now that I think about it, we want to log out as well, right? Well, let's implement that as well. So the first thing we need is a route. So we're gonna call it logout. And we're gonna give it the auth.logout tsx. Or rather not tsx but ts, because we're gonna use only the action. So export const action, you know the deal. So here we just want to log the user out. Well, check this out. So const auth session is equal to get auth session, unset, user, return, redirect, login. That's it. And now all we have to do is the following. So we're gonna replace the GitHub button with the logout button. So here in the site header, we're gonna say logout. And instead of this being an H tag, we're gonna remove this. And we're gonna just say that this is a form from React Router, which submits a post to logout. And we're gonna again use the href, and that's it, we save it. We have the logout button now here. We click it, and bam, something failed. Let's check out the logs. Cannot read properties on undefined reading email at global storage middleware. And now that we think about it, this here can be undefined. Save. Let's try that again. I click logout, I'm out. That's it. Pretty awesome, right? Alright, we just implemented login, register, and sign out in a pretty short time. And I've given you an amazing foundation to build upon. Now you can use it to your advantage. And as if you remember earlier, I said the user is now maybe available on the root ESX. So as you can see it in the DevTools, that is indeed the case. So the user is null, but if I log in and go somewhere else that's not the dashboard, he would be available. And we protect the routes we want with middleware. We store the auth session data with middleware by self-committing sessions. We give the functions in our code base a really easy way to log out, to get the auth session, and we're really happy with this. Alright, this was a lengthy video and I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to make a deep dive and teach you how to do it. I just want to let you know that I'm an Epic instructor on epicweb.dev. So if you're interested in a React Router course that teaches you this and a lot more other stuff, feel free to subscribe to the newsletter there and keep up to date, and also subscribe to the channel. I hope you like this one and thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye!